I'm Kathryn Russell, and my speech is over mitochondrial DNA. I need to restart. Doors open. Okay. I'm Kathryn Russell, and my speech is over mitochondrial DNA. So I'm basically just going to go over what it is, and then what we've discovered from studying mitochondrial DNA, and this is just especially evolutionarily speaking. So basic information, it's inherited maternally, which means that everybody gets their mitochondrial DNA from their mother. So I got my mitochondrial DNA from my mom, you got yours from your mom, your brother got his from his mom. Every single person gets theirs from their mother. So you would never get your mitochondrial DNA from your father. And humans have about 16,000 base pairs within the mitochondrial DNA that encode for 37 genes. And this is according to a research project that was done at Harvard, and the link is right there. And they have their own separate genome from DNA. So within the nucleus, you have DNA, and when I say DNA, that's what most people think of, is the DNA that, codes for hair color, eye color, height, things like that, and that is within the nucleus. And within the cell, but outside of the nucleus, is the mitochondria, and it has DNA, but its own separate genome. So basically, it's a completely different sequence of DNA from the DNA that's in the nucleus. So it's not, it'd be like two separate books. So within the nucleus is one book, and then there's DNA inside the mitochondria, but it's a completely separate book. It has a completely different message, that kind of thing. And because it has its own genome, this gives us a molecular clock, which tells us a lot about our evolution as a species. And one of those discoveries being mitochondrial Eve. And this isn't a reference to the biblical Eve. The scientists and people that came up with this discovery don't believe in the Bible. They didn't discover this and wake up the next day and be like, Jesus Christ died for our sins. Like, they just named it that because that's what they wanted to name it. Probably as a joke, but then the joke's on them in the end. So, beginning in 1987, several studies have been conducted to show that all humans living today have the same female ancestor. And you can figure out more information on this in Richard Dawkins' book called The Ancestor's Tale. If you don't know anything about Richard Dawkins, he is sometimes referred to as the world's most famous atheist. And so she basically is just the maternal, most recent common ancestor of all living humans, and we all have her mitochondrial DNA. She is thought to have lived 20,000 years ago. So there's a controversy within this discovery. Like I said earlier, these scientists don't all of a sudden believe in the Bible. The reason why it's controversial is because the lineage could look one of two ways. It can look like the picture on the left, which is showing that mitochondrial Eve was not the only living human being at the time. There were other people living, but for some reason every single one of them died out, and then she was able to continue her lineage, and they would have to continue. So the orange guy or girl, we'll call her a girl, she, in the reality in which we're living in today, we wouldn't have her mitochondrial DNA. We would only have the girl that's outlined in black. And so she would not pass on her mitochondrial DNA, which means that basically if you really follow this chain, the kids would have to commit incest. So I guess they knew that this was going to happen, so they all decided to. So it could be that, that reality, the picture on the left, and that would discredit the Bible, because the Bible does, if you track its lineage, and so many people have done this, so many pastors, the timeline of it would be that, God created the earth about 6,000 years ago, and if mitochondrial Eve lived 20,000 years ago, the Bible would be wrong. There would be, this just everything about Christianity or Judaism or whatever, different perspectives you want to get from the Bible would be wrong. Or, it could also look like the picture on the right, which is showing the more biblical timeline, and that is that God created Adam and Eve, and they created every human that's ever lived on earth, And so the biggest difference between these two ideas is one, where they come from, but two, that with the picture on the left that would discredit the Bible is saying that there were more than it was more than just mitochondrial Eve that was living at the time, and the biblical lineage says that mitochondrial Eve and Adam, or whatever, were the only people living on Earth at the time, and we all came from them. And then the other distinction is that the photo on the left would be saying that not the photo, but the theory that goes with the photo would be saying that mitochondrial Eve lived about 20,000 years ago, and the photo on the right would be saying that she lived about 6,000 years ago, and that would confirm the Bible and whatever. So in order to dispel this controversy, we have to look at how mitochondrial DNA is inherited. So it's inherited as an exact copy except for some mutations. So the DNA that you get from your parents, that your parents pass on to you, you don't look the exact same as your parents. And so, your DNA is obviously very different from your mother and father, from your siblings, from whoever. And so that is not inherited as an exact copy, but mitochondrial DNA is. And mitochondrial DNA, helps the cell. It's not about physical appearance, so it's okay if it's the same, they're two separate genomes, so that's okay. And because there are mutations every once in a while, the 37 genes, they rarely mutate, and this is why it's such a great model for an evolutionary clock. They mutate in subsections in a very predictable manner, which helps scientists to reference age. So if there is, 5 mutations every 100 years and 200 years, there should be 10 mutations, and so on and so forth. And so if I find someone in Alaska that, is like a dead body, and I collect their DNA, then I can say, all right, they have about, 15 mutations, so they should have lived about 300 years ago. And so it's a very predictable manner, and it helps us to reference age. And so essentially the fewer number of mutations the fewer number that this generation has mutated from mitochondrial Eve's DNA, then the shorter amount of time she lived, and then if there are a huge amount of mutations, then she lived a lot longer. So that's how we can kind of dispel this controversy. So the rate, mitochondrial DNA clock is basically the rate at which mutations occur in a DNA genome. And it's already calibrated to a few assumptions, and if you calibrate anything to the wrong numbers, then you're going to get inaccurate data, obviously. The first assumption we've made to create this false calibration is that the fossil record is accurate, that radiometric dating is accurate, and that humans diverge from chimps. These are the 3 assumptions we have built our foundation on, which is kind of interesting. But Thomas J. Parsons published a paper in 1997 looking at the control region of mitochondrial DNA as a molecular clock. He expected to find 1 mutation every 12,000 years, and he expected to find this because that would kind of prove the assumptions correct. And he looked at 327 generational events and found that the mutation rate is actually 1 in every 800 years. Which doesn't seem like that big of a difference, but that's magnitudely faster than we would have ever expected. And this, doesn't seem to be much of a problem until we apply it to human evolution, because this means that mitochondrial Eve becomes 6,000 years old instead of the previously thought 20,000. And all of this research, how I came up with those numbers and everything, can be found at the link over there. So in conclusion, mitochondrial DNA proves that all humans have evolved from one woman who lived 6,000 years ago. And of course this doesn't mean, right away that the Bible is correct, that there is a God who loves us. But there's several assumptions, or not assumptions, but there are several claims that the Bible makes that you can, spend your own time looking at and kind of seeing if they're true or not. But, if it is true, then you didn't happen on accident, and you do have a purpose on Earth. And so that little guy on the right says, you happened on accident and you have no purpose, worship government, not God. reference George Soros, which is a joke, but basically that's what communism is they try to get you to worship the government by telling you that you happened on accident, which clearly isn't true, in my opinion, but that's, everyone can draw their own conclusions about how we got here and things like that. So that's about it. This is the communism flag on the little red guy, so kind of funny. And then all of the references, so thanks for watching or listening or doing whatever, both.